Mr. Lowenthal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you, the Chair, also for holding this hearing. And I think we can all agree that the Army Corps and Congress should look for better ways to make sure that needed projects are delivered to our communities without added delays and without additional expense, and that we look for ways of creative financing. But I want to return to one of the focuses of this committee, and that's on the issue of regulatory streamlining. And first, I'd like to ask permission to enter into the record a recently completed paper by the Center for American Progress entitled "The Benefits of NEPA," if I may enter that into the record. Thank you.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as we engage in the issue of regulatory streamlining, we must make sure that these efforts do not erode the landmark protections and the processes that ensure that large infrastructure projects are planned and constructed with care for our environment and protection of our local communities. For example, in my district, I hear quite frequently how NEPA and other environmental laws have enabled better decision-making, and how these processes have often saved a project time or money and have helped to find innovative solutions to difficult problems. So, for example, in the Everport project, which is a port expansion at the Port of Los Angeles, which is just immediately adjacent to my district, during the NEPA review, the EPA expressed concerns about the project's air quality and the human health impacts, particularly on low-income and minority communities that happen to be immediately surrounding the port. In the final EIS, the Army Corps strengthened an air quality mitigation measure to specify that all the dredging equipment be electric, a provision that reduced the project's construction emissions while still allowing the project to move forward. You know, this certainly can't be the only example of how NEPA has produced a win-win for both the economy and the environment. So my question is to Ms. Carter, to General Jackson, or to Mr. Dalton. In your experience, how does the NEPA process work on the ground? If some critics are to believe worthwhile projects are delayed for years by fringe activists who have no attachment to communities, I'd like to know if that's really true or not. And I want to follow, especially in the answer from Ms. Carter, that a recent review by the Congressional Research Service, this follows up on a question from my colleague from Texas, that said that you've investigated the cause for delay of project development, and you found that in of the 40 projects reviewed, this may have been the Department of Treasury Commission study, both CRS and the Department of the Treasury have commissioned a study, that 39 of the 40 projects that were reviewed, the real delay is funding, not NEPA. So I'd like to ask you, here, what happens on the ground? Is NEPA a major cause of project delay? And what are your experiences on the ground with how NEPA actually works? I'd like to hear. And what recommendations would you make to us about that?
Thank you for the question. As you know, CRS does not take a position or make recommendations. The study that you identify is the AECOM study, the Commission for the Build America Investment Initiative. It reviewed 40 projects and identified through that review what were some of the principal elements that were affecting the project being able to be delivered. And the first one identified was federal funding, consensus was another one, and the fourth one was regulatory issues. But that's relevant to those 40 projects. Additional analysis on a broader set of projects, it was not available from that study. Specifically regarding Army Corps of Engineers projects and NEPA, it's an integrated process that the Corps uses for developing the feasibility study with the NEPA analysis, so you can't really parse out how long certain pieces take. I am not the NEPA expert at CRS. If there are additional questions specifically regarding NEPA sort of writ large, we can take those questions for the record. Thank you.
Any other comments? I know I just have a minute.
Congressman, I would say that, one, we're not looking at NEPA as sort of the, the bad thing that happens to projects, that causes bad things that happens to projects. I think what we're all talking about and looking for when we talk about regulatory streamlining for looking at our environmental compliance is with the one federal decision, we're just looking to try and have more collaboration, earlier collaboration, and do everything as identify all the requirements one time and go down that road once as opposed to doing it in phases. Now, I think we're doing that, trying to do that better within the Corps of Engineers, but certainly there are areas of improvement, but by no means are we looking to eliminate
Mr.
environmental
Dalton,
requirements.
the gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. So now